Before we begin, please be aware that this story contains themes of mystery, crime, and psychological suspense that some listeners may find unsettling. The air was thick, not with the metallic tang of blood, but with something far more insidious, a profound, unsettling silence. It clung to the floral wallpaper of the living room, muffled the distant wail of sirens, and settled like a shroud over the one impossible detail that greeted Detective David Miller the moment he stepped across the threshold. It wasn't the body crumpled on the Persian rug that first seized his attention, not even the crimson stain blooming beneath it. No, it was the mannequin. It stood perfectly upright, almost defiantly, in the corner of the room, its plastic sheen reflecting the harsh glare of the crime scene lights. Dressed in a simple, elegant dark blue evening gown, its featureless face was turned directly towards the victim, its blank eyes fixed in an unblinking stare. It was a still, silent sentinel, utterly out of place in the suburban home of Emily Carter, a woman whose life, by all accounts, had been meticulously ordinary until tonight. David, a veteran of 2 decades on the force, had seen horrors that would curdle the blood of lesser men. He'd navigated scenes of unimaginable brutality, walked through the aftermath of human depravity, and yet, the sight of this inanimate figure sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the chill of the late October night. There was something profoundly, disturbingly wrong about it. It wasn't just a prop. It was a silent, mocking participant. "Miller," his partner, Detective Jessica Chan, murmured, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. She gestured towards the mannequin with a gloved hand, her usual pragmatic demeanor replaced by a visible unease. "You see that, right? It's not real." The question in her voice wasn't about its authenticity, but its very existence here, now. "I see it, Chan," David replied, his voice gruff, betraying none of the cold dread coiling in his gut. He knew Emily Carter. Not well, but enough to know she was a librarian, a quiet woman who volunteered at the local animal shelter, lived alone and had no known enemies. Her life was a carefully catalogued existence of predictable routines and modest pleasures. Mannequins, especially those dressed in evening wear, were not part of Emily Carter's world. He knelt beside the victim, a woman in her early 50s, her face pale, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as if in silent protest. A single deep laceration across her throat told a brutal story, but the absence of struggle, the lack of overturned furniture or shattered glass, suggested a sudden, swift attack. Or perhaps something far more sinister. A victim caught entirely off guard, or worse, someone who knew her killer, someone she had no reason to fear until it was too late. "Time of death?" David asked the forensic tech, Ben, who was meticulously dusting a nearby bookshelf. "Still estimating, Detective. Probably sometime between 9 p.m. and midnight. No forced entry. Windows are locked. Looks like she let them in." David nodded, his gaze drifting back to the mannequin. "And the mannequin?" Ben paused, a perplexed frown on his face. "No prints. None on the surface, none on the clothes. It's been wiped clean, sir. Wiped perfectly. Wiped perfectly." The words echoed in David's mind. It wasn't just left there. It was placed. And cleaned. It was an intentional statement. He stood up, circling the room slowly, his eyes scanning every detail, but always returning to the silent observer. The mannequin was positioned just a few feet from Emily's body, almost as if it had been watching the entire brutal act unfold. It wasn't leaning against the wall. It was standing free, dominant, like a guest of honor at a macabre banquet. Its plastic skin, a muted peach tone, seemed to absorb the light, giving it a strangely ethereal glow in the otherwise grim setting. Its simple, unadorned hands were clasped loosely in front of it, a pose of serene indifference. "Any neighbors hear anything?" Jessica asked, pulling out her notepad. One neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, 2 doors down, said she thought she heard a faint scream around 10:30, but dismissed it as kids playing, Ben replied, still dusting. Said Emily usually kept to herself. David ran a hand over his tired face. "Kids playing. Right." He walked closer to the mannequin, stopping just inches from its fixed gaze. The dress it wore, a rich sapphire blue, was expensive, clearly not something Emily Carter would own, nor was it the kind of attire one would typically find on a display model in a discount store. This was high-end boutique quality. "Check her closet, Jessica," David instructed, his eyes still locked on the mannequin. "I want to know if she owned anything like this, or if anything similar is missing." Jessica disappeared down a short hallway. David continued his silent communion with the plastic figure. He tried to imagine the killer setting this up. What kind of person, after committing such a violent act, would then take the time to meticulously place a mannequin, dress it, and position it to stare at their victim? It spoke of a calculated cruelty, a theatrical flair that chilled him to the bone. This wasn't just a murder, it was a performance. And the mannequin was the audience, or perhaps the director. He noticed a small detail then, something he'd missed in his initial shock. Around the mannequin's neck, almost hidden by the collar of the dress, was a delicate silver chain. And hanging from it a small intricate key. It wasn't a house key or a car key. It was an old-fashioned skeleton key, the kind that might unlock an antique chest or a forgotten diary. "Jessica!" David called out, his voice sharper now. "Get back here!" Jessica reappeared, a bewildered expression on her face. "Her closet is full of sensible cardigans and sensible shoes, David. Nothing like this dress. Absolutely nothing." "Look at this," David said, pointing to the key. Jessica leaned in, her brow furrowed. "A key? What for?" "That's exactly what I want to know," David said, his gaze sweeping the room again. A small, almost imperceptible tremor of unease ran through him. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was a message painstakingly crafted, delivered with an unsettling precision. The mannequin, silent and stoic, was the centerpiece of a narrative David was only just beginning to decipher. And he had a terrifying feeling that this was just the prologue. The chill that snaked down David's spine wasn't just from the open window. It was the icy touch of something profoundly wrong, a violation of the natural order that transcended mere murder. He forced himself to take a deep, shaky breath, the metallic tang of fear sharp in his mouth. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a stage, and the mannequin, a silent, unblinking actor in a play David felt he was being forced to watch and participate in. He called it in, his voice tighter than usual, the words catching in his throat as he described the scene to dispatch. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street was alive with the flashing blue and red of patrol cars, their sirens a mournful wail against the pre-dawn silence. Uniformed officers secured the perimeter, their faces a mixture of grim professionalism and uneasy curiosity as they peered into the grand, illuminated dining room. David's partner, Detective Sarah Miller, arrived shortly after. Sarah was a woman who could stare down a charging bull without blinking, her sharp mind and even sharper wit legendary within the precinct. But even she paused, hand hovering over her mouth, as her gaze swept from the lifeless body of Arthur Jenkins to the immaculate mannequin seated opposite him. Her usually steady eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Well, I've seen some things," she murmured, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "But this takes the cake, David." "Tell me about it," David replied, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "No forced entry. Looks like Arthur Jenkins was having a very exclusive dinner party." They walked around the table slowly, careful not to disturb anything. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive cologne and something else. Something sterile, almost clinical, that seemed to cling to the pristine setting. Arthur Jenkins, a prominent venture capitalist known for his ruthless business dealings, lay slumped over a plate of untouched gourmet food, a single, perfectly aimed bullet wound in his temple. His expression was frozen in a look of mild surprise, as if he hadn't even had time to register fear. Sarah knelt, examining the victim with a practiced eye. Clean shot. Professional. No struggle. No signs of a robbery either. His watch is still on, rings, wallet probably in his pocket untouched. She straightened, her gaze fixed on the mannequin. "So, the guest of honor." David nodded, his eyes scanning the room, trying to find a crack in the meticulously constructed facade. "The note. It's in its hand." Sarah carefully lifted the mannequin's rigid hand, revealing a single folded piece of thick cream-colored paper. She used gloved fingers to retrieve it, her movements precise. She unfolded it, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's typed," she announced, her voice low. "No fingerprints on the paper, I'd wager." "And the message?" She paused, reading it again, then looked up at David, her expression unreadable. "It says, 'The first lesson is punctuality. You are late, Mr. Jenkins.'" David felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "Punctuality? He's dead, Sarah. What does that even mean?" "It means our killer is playing games, David. And they're not subtle about it." Sarah carefully placed the note into an evidence bag. This isn't just a murder. It's a statement. A performance. The forensics team, led by the meticulous Dr. Evelyn Reed, began to swarm the scene. Evelyn, a woman whose calm demeanor masked an almost obsessive attention to detail, moved with a quiet efficiency, her team fanning out, dusting, photographing, collecting. They meticulously documented every place setting, every piece of silverware, every minute detail of the mannequin's attire. A custom-tailored suit identical in every stitch and fabric to the one Arthur Jenkins was wearing. No prints on the mannequin itself, David, Evelyn reported, her voice soft but firm. The surface seems to have been wiped down thoroughly. Same with the table, the chairs, the surrounding floor. It's almost surgically clean. Almost. David pressed. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. There are faint, almost imperceptible traces of a cleaning agent. Something industrial. And a very fine layer of dust on the upper surfaces of the light fixtures, but nothing on the table or the mannequin. It suggests the scene was set up, cleaned, and then left for a short period before the event. David walked over to the mannequin again, studying its blank, painted face. Its eyes, wide and unblinking, seemed to stare straight ahead, past Arthur Jenkins, past him into some distant, unseen point. It was unsettling, the sheer lack of humanity. The way it sat there, so perfectly still, so perfectly dressed, a silent sentinel of death. "Look at the suit," David said, gesturing to the mannequin. "It's identical. Same material, same cut, even the same tie. Custom made, I'd bet." Sarah examined it. Arthur Jenkins was known for his bespoke suits. This killer went to a lot of trouble to recreate his style. Why? To make a point, David mused, his mind racing. To mock him? To make him feel replaced? They spent the next few hours sifting through the initial evidence. No shell casing was found. The bullet, once recovered, would likely be the only tangible link to the weapon. The house's security system showed no intrusions, no anomalies. Arthur Jenkins had clearly let his killer in, or the killer had a key. The only thing out of place, the only thing that screamed murder, was everything. It was all too perfect, too staged. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale, sickly light through the grand windows, David and Sarah retreated to a makeshift command post set up in the living room, away from the immediate crime scene. They spread out initial reports, photographs, and a rough sketch of the dining room. "Arthur Jenkins," Sarah began, tapping a pen against a printout of his profile. 58 years old. Divorced twice. No kids. CEO of Apex Capital Group. Filthy rich. Made his fortune in tech investments. Known for being ruthless, aggressive, a real shark. Plenty of enemies in the business world, I'm sure. But this isn't a typical business hit, is it? David countered, looking at the photos of the mannequin. This is personal. The note, the mannequin, the whole theatrical display. Someone wanted to send a very specific message, and they wanted Arthur to understand it before he died. Or they wanted us to understand it, Sarah corrected, her eyes narrowing. This isn't just for Arthur. This is for the police, for the public, for whoever is watching. David picked up the evidence bag containing the note. The first lesson is punctuality. You are late, Mr. Jenkins. He repeated the words, trying to find a hidden meaning. What was he supposed to be punctual for? A meeting? A deadline? His own death. Could be a reference to a past event, Sarah suggested. Something Arthur was involved in, where someone felt he was late, or didn't deliver on time. Or perhaps a more abstract concept of time. Maybe Jenkins was running out of time for something, and the killer decided to enforce the deadline. David's gaze drifted back to the photos of the mannequin. The identical suit, the rigid posture, the blank face. It was a mirror image, a silent double. And then a thought, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of his exhaustion. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "look at the mannequin again. Really look at it." Sarah leaned closer to the photograph. It's a standard female mannequin, dressed in a man's suit. High-end, but still just a mannequin. "Exactly," David said, a dawning horror in his eyes. "It's a female mannequin. Custom dressed, yes, but the body underneath the suit, it's distinctly feminine. Why go to all that trouble for a female mannequin, only to dress it as a man identical to Arthur, if not to make a very specific, very unsettling statement?" Sarah stared at the photo, then back at David, a similar realization dawning in her own eyes. You're saying the gender of the mannequin matters, that it's not just a prop. It's part of the message. It's a deliberate choice, David insisted, his mind now racing down a new terrifying path. They could have used a male mannequin or even just a prop dummy, but they chose a female form and then masked it. Why? What does a female mannequin dressed as a man sitting opposite the victim signify? Is it a warning? A twisted tribute? Or is it a promise? The silence in the living room stretched, heavy and profound. The meticulousness of the crime, the unsettling symbolism, the cryptic note, and now the hidden detail of the mannequin's gender. It all pointed to a mind operating on a level of chilling calculation. This wasn't just about Arthur Jenkins anymore. This was a narrative unfolding piece by piece, and David had a terrifying feeling that the mannequin, silent and stoic, was not just a centerpiece, but a harbinger. And he had a terrifying feeling that this was just the prologue. The chilling realization settled over David like a shroud, heavy and cold. This wasn't just a murder, it was a carefully constructed tableau, a grim overture. He watched as the forensic team, a swarm of focused activity, meticulously cataloged every speck and fiber in Arthur Jenkins' home. Yet, for all their practiced precision, David felt they were missing the true narrative, blinded by the immediate facts. The crime scene was strangely sterile, almost too clean of conventional clues. No forced entry, no struggle, no obvious weapon. Just Arthur, gone, and the silent, judging mannequin. Sarah, her brow furrowed, joined him, a tablet clutched in her hand. Nothing. No prints beyond Jenkins' own. A few smudges that could be anyone who's ever visited. No signs of struggle. Tox report will take a while, but it looks like a clean, precise job. Almost surgical. David's gaze drifted back to the mannequin, its painted eyes fixed on the empty armchair. Surgical, yes, but also theatrical. This isn't about just killing Arthur. This is about showing us something. The mannequin, it's not just a prop, Sarah. It's a character. Sarah shivered, despite the warmth of the house. A character playing what role? The observer? The killer's proxy? Or a stand-in? David murmured, a disturbing thought taking root. A placeholder for the real audience, or perhaps for the next victim. He felt a primal unease, a gnawing certainty that this quiet suburban street was merely the first page of a much darker story. The silence of the house, once merely somber, now felt pregnant with unspoken threats. Hours bled into the late afternoon. The house was finally cleared, sealed off for further investigation. David and Sarah found themselves back at the precinct, the sterile glow of fluorescent lights doing little to dispel the lingering shadows of Arthur Jenkins' living room. They sat in their cramped office surrounded by case files, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and unspoken questions. So, Arthur Jenkins, Sarah began, scrolling through the preliminary report. 72 years old, retired accountant, widower, no children, active in a local chess club, a few charity organizations, quiet life, no enemies that anyone knows of, no significant assets to fight over, no obvious motive. Exactly, David said, leaning back, rubbing his temples. A ghost of a man, the kind of person who could disappear and it would take weeks for anyone to notice. Why him? Why this elaborate display? They spent the next few days chasing shadows. Interviews with Jenkins' neighbors yielded nothing but pleasantries and expressions of shock. His chess club friends remembered him as a formidable opponent, but an utterly unremarkable man. The charity organizations confirmed his regular, modest contributions. Every lead dissolved into the mundane, leaving them with nothing but the image of the mannequin. David found himself sketching the mannequin in his notebook during downtime, trying to decode its posture, its blank stare. He even looked up the history of mannequins, their use in art, in retail, in training. Nothing clicked. It felt like a riddle without a discernible language. Then for days later the phone rang. It was Detective Miller from the neighboring district, his voice tight with urgency. "David, Sarah, you need to get over here. We've got something you might want to see. It's eerily similar to your Jenkins case." A cold dread gripped David instantly. His premonition had been right. The prologue was over. The new scene was starkly different, yet disturbingly familiar. It was an abandoned, dilapidated warehouse on the industrial outskirts of town, a skeletal structure of rusted metal and broken windows. The air inside was cold, damp, and smelled of decay and something metallic. As David and Sarah stepped through the police tape, guided by Miller, they saw it. In the center of the vast empty space, lit by a single bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling, was another tableau. This time the victim was a woman mid-30s, dressed in what appeared to be a vibrant, flowing artistic gown, now dulled by grime and the warehouse's oppressive atmosphere. She was positioned upright, almost kneeling, her head tilted back as if in ecstasy or agony, hands outstretched towards the ceiling. Her eyes were wide open, glazed over. A single delicate silver chain lay broken at her feet. And facing her, barely 10 feet away, was another mannequin. This one was different. It wasn't the classic, elegant model from Jenkins' home. This mannequin was an older, more rustic design, with slightly chipped paint and a simpler, almost childlike face. It was dressed in plain, dark clothing, a stark contrast to the victim's elaborate attire. But its posture was what truly sent a jolt through David. It stood with its arms crossed, head slightly cocked to the side, as if in contemplation or perhaps judgment. "Her name is Emily Hayes," Miller said, his voice hushed. "She was an art gallery owner, specializing in avant-garde installations. Reported missing by her assistant 2 days ago." David's breath hitched. An art gallery owner. The elaborate gown. The theatrical staging. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. "No signs of struggle here either," Miller continued, gesturing around the vast space. "Forensics is just getting started, but it looks like another clean job. No forced entry, no obvious weapon. Just this." Sarah walked slowly around the scene, her eyes scanning every detail, her expression a mix of horror and intense concentration. "It's like a macabre art installation itself," she whispered. "The victim, the mannequin, the setting. It's all part of a deliberate composition." David approached the mannequin, a strange magnetism drawing him in. Its chipped face seemed to mock him with its blankness. "It's a different mannequin," he observed. "Different style, different clothing. But the intention is the same. To observe. To judge." He noticed something small tucked into the mannequin's crossed arms. A single withered red rose, its petals crumbling. He carefully pointed it out to forensics. "Bag that. Everything here is deliberate." The next few hours were a blur of activity. The warehouse became a hive of investigators, each trying to make sense of the senseless. David and Sarah worked methodically, trying to find any connection, any thread that could link Emily Hayes to Arthur Jenkins. Jenkins, a retired accountant. Hayes, an avant-garde art dealer, Sarah mused later, back at the precinct. The two cases spread across their evidence board. One lived a quiet, unremarkable life. The other lived in the vibrant, often controversial world of modern art. What could possibly connect them? "Maybe it's not them," David suggested, tapping his pen against the board. "Maybe it's what they represent, or what the killer thinks they represent." He stared at the two crime scene photos side by side. Arthur Jenkins in his armchair, the elegant mannequin opposite him, Emily Hayes kneeling in the warehouse, the rustic mannequin observing her, a withered rose in its arms. Two distinct victims, two distinct mannequins, two highly theatrical settings. "The mannequin in Jenkins' house was classic, almost stately," Sarah said, following his gaze. "The one here older, simpler, almost folksy. What if the mannequins aren't just observers, David? What if they're part of the killer's narrative? Different characters in a twisted play?" David nodded slowly. "And the settings? A cozy traditional living room. A desolate, abandoned warehouse. What story is being told here? What contrast is the killer trying to highlight?" The pressure from Captain Reynolds was immediate and intense. Two murders, seemingly unconnected victims, yet unmistakably linked by the bizarre theatrical staging. The media was already catching wind of the unusual circumstances, speculating wildly about a serial killer with a morbid artistic flair. "We need answers, detectives," Reynolds had thundered, his face a mask of grim determination. "And we need them yesterday. This isn't a random act of violence. This is a statement. Find out what that statement is and who is making it." David felt the weight of Reynolds' words, but also a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just a hunt for a killer. It was a decryption process. The killer wasn't just taking lives. They were constructing a narrative piece by horrifying piece. And the mannequins, silent and stoic, were the recurring motif, the punctuation marks in a sentence of terror. He thought about the withered red rose in the second mannequin's arms. A symbol of love or loss, or perhaps a twisted commentary on both. What did it mean? What did any of it mean? He looked at Sarah, her eyes reflecting his own exhaustion and frustration. We're not looking for a motive in the conventional sense, Sarah. We're looking for a theme. A message. The realization hit him with a sickening certainty. The killer wasn't merely leaving clues. They were building a story, a grand, horrifying narrative unfolding across their city. And David had a terrifying feeling that this was just the second chapter. The mannequins were not just silent witnesses. They were the key, the silent narrators of a story that was far from over. And he had a terrifying feeling that the next installation would be even more disturbing. The chill that ran down Detective Miller's spine had nothing to do with the night air. It was the icy grip of recognition, the dawning horror that a pattern was emerging, one crafted with meticulous, terrifying intent. He stood at the edge of the police tape, the flashing blue and red lights painting a macabre disco on the facade of what used to be elegance and thread. A high-end women's boutique that had closed its doors 2 years prior. Now, its darkened display windows were a canvas for something far more sinister than fashion. Inside, the scene was a grotesque echo of the first. The victim, a young woman named Sarah Thompson, lay slumped against a wall, her eyes wide open, fixed on an unseen point. She was in her late 20s, an aspiring graphic designer, found by a former colleague who dropped by to retrieve some old design samples she'd left behind before the boutique shut down. The cause of death appeared to be strangulation, brutal and efficient, leaving minimal struggle marks. But the true horror wasn't Sarah's lifeless form. It was the silent observer. Another mannequin. This one was positioned differently, not cradling the victim, not an intimate, macabre companion. This mannequin sat upright at a small, ornate antique table, covered in a pristine white cloth, as if awaiting a tea party. It was dressed in a stunning custom-made gown of deep emerald silk, a piece that looked like it belonged on a runway, not in a deserted, dusty shop. Its plastic hands were delicately arranged around a delicate porcelain teacup, poised in an eternal toast. And directly across from it, the other chair at the table was empty, pulled out, waiting for Sarah. Miller felt a knot tighten in his gut. This wasn't just a copycat. It was an escalation, a twisted narrative unfolding. The first mannequin had been dressed in the victim's own clothes, a chilling doppelganger. This one wore something exquisite, something entirely alien to Sarah Thompson's known wardrobe. It was a statement piece, almost a costume. "Miller, you seeing this?" Detective Reynolds, his partner, breathed, his voice a low growl of disbelief. "It's him. Same signature. The mannequin." Miller nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The dust on the floor was undisturbed around the mannequin and the table, indicating they'd been placed with extreme care. Sarah, however, had left a faint drag mark where she'd been moved. The killer wasn't just leaving a body. They were creating a tableau, an art installation of dread. "No forced entry again," Miller observed, hands on his hips. "The lock's old but intact. How did he get her in here? And how did he get himself in and out without a trace?" "Same as last time, maybe," Reynolds mused. "He knew a way in. Or he knew the victim." Miller walked closer to the mannequin, careful not to disturb anything. The gown was impeccably tailored, its fabric shimmering even in the dim light. He noticed a small silver locket hanging from its neck, nestled just above the silk. He leaned in, squinting. It wasn't a cheap prop. It was real, antique, intricately engraved. He couldn't make out the details from his distance, but it added another layer to the enigma. This wasn't just a random mannequin. It was a character. The forensics team, led by Dr. Evelyn Reed, moved with quiet urgency, their movements precise and practiced. "No obvious prints on the mannequin, Detective," Reed reported, her voice calm amidst the chaos. "But we found something interesting on the first one, a specific type of industrial sealant, almost microscopic, on its left shoulder blade. It's not something you find in a typical home, or even a retail store for mannequins. It suggests it was handled or stored in a very particular environment." Miller's mind raced. An industrial sealant? What kind? A workshop? A factory? And the fibers from the first scene? Still processing. But preliminary results show a fine, almost invisible synthetic fiber on the first victim's clothing that doesn't match anything in her apartment. It's consistent with a high-end fabric, possibly from a very specific type of outdoor gear or a specialized uniform. and we found a similar fiber on the first mannequin. So the killer was wearing something specific, Miller muttered, rubbing his jaw, and he transferred it to the victim in the mannequin. That sealant, could it be from where he keeps them, or where he makes them? Reed nodded. It's a possibility. We're running it through our databases now. The sealant has a unique chemical signature. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a random killer. This was someone methodical, meticulous, and with access to specialized materials and locations. The mannequins weren't just props. They were part of the killer's personal narrative, perhaps even a reflection of the killer's identity or profession. Back at the precinct, the whiteboard in the incident room was rapidly filling with new details. Sarah Thompson, like Emily Harrison, had been single, lived alone, and had no history of serious relationships or known enemies. Both were in their late 20s, early 30s. Both had been found in meticulously staged crime scenes involving mannequins. But the similarities ended there. Emily was a librarian, quiet, reserved. Sarah was a freelance graphic designer, more outgoing with a wider social circle. There was no obvious connection between them. No shared friends, no overlapping workplaces, no common haunts. We're looking for a common thread, Detective Reynolds said, gesturing to the board. Something more than just young single woman. The killer isn't choosing randomly. These mannequins, they're sending a message. What is it? Miller stared at the photos of the second mannequin, the emerald gown, the porcelain teacup, and then his eyes landed on the locket. He zoomed in on the image. It was an oval locket, silver, with an intricate floral pattern. But what truly caught his attention was a small, almost imperceptible engraving on the back. A single stylized letter. The locket, Miller said, drawing everyone's attention. Get a closer look at that. The engraving. It's an... Reed, who was reviewing her notes, looked up. An E? Interesting. No initially for Sarah Thompson, or Emily Harrison for that matter. No, Miller confirmed. But what if it's not for the victim? What if it's for something else? A place? Person? Or a brand? He remembered the exquisite gown. Reed, can you get the lab to analyze that dress? See if there are any labels, any identifying marks. And the locket, try to trace its origin. It looks antique. Hours bled into days. The city was on edge. 2 women, 2 mannequins, 2 meticulously staged scenes. The media was starting to pick up on the chilling similarities, dubbing the perpetrator the doll maker. The pressure on Miller and his team intensified. Every lead seemed to hit a dead end. Every interview yielded nothing. Then a breakthrough from Reed's lab. Detective Miller. Reed's voice was tight with excitement over the phone. That gown on the second mannequin? It's a bespoke piece, made by a very exclusive high-end fashion house called Elysian Couture. They're known for their custom work, often for private clients or high-profile events. Miller felt a jolt. Elysian. With an... Exactly. And the locket? It's a rare Victorian piece, identified by a local antique dealer. It's part of a limited collection from the late 19th century, known for their specific floral engravings. The dealer recognized the style. He said pieces from that collection sometimes turn up at very specific, high-end auctions or private sales. Elysian Couture, Miller repeated, the name echoing in his mind. And a rare antique locket. This isn't just about killing. It's about presentation, about luxury, about a very specific aesthetic. He pictured the first mannequin, dressed in Emily's simple clothes, and then the second in the opulent gown. The contrast was stark, yet the intent felt the same. A message. We're trying to get a client list for Elysian Couture, Reed continued. But it's highly confidential. They cater to a very elite clientele. And the sealant? We've got a preliminary match. It's a unique polymer used in high-end art restoration and museum display fabrication. Very specialized stuff. Not something you pick up at a hardware store. A museum. An art restorer. A high-end fashion house. The pieces were starting to coalesce, forming a terrifying profile of a killer who was not just a murderer, but an artist of death, a curator of sorrow. Someone with an eye for detail, access to exclusive circles, and a chilling penchant for theatrical display. Miller hung up, his mind buzzing. Elysian Couture. The name itself felt like a clue. Was the killer connected to the fashion house? Was it a client? An employee? Or was it simply another layer of the elaborate, twisted narrative they were trying to construct? He pulled up the photos of the first crime scene, then the second side by side. Emily, the quiet librarian, with her mannequin dressed in her modest clothes, a silent companion in death. Sarah, the aspiring designer, with her mannequin in an emerald gown, a silent host at a macabre tea party. The contrast was deliberate. It was a story, and Miller had a terrifying premonition that the killer was just getting started. This wasn't merely a series of murders, it was a deadly performance, and the audience was him. He felt the weight of it, the chilling realization that he wasn't just investigating. He was participating, being led deeper into a labyrinth designed by a deranged mind. The mannequins weren't just witnesses, they were the killer's puppets, and their next act, he knew, would likely be even more horrifying. The silent narrators were speaking, and their story was far from over. The silent narrators were speaking, and their story was far from over. Detective Michael Miller felt a cold dread settle deep in his bones, a sensation far more chilling than any he'd experienced in his years on the force. The mannequins, those silent, hollow-eyed observers, weren't just props in a gruesome tableau. They were the killer's chosen voice, the instruments of a deranged symphony. He spent the next few hours poring over the crime scene photos again, his gaze fixed on each plastic face, each unnaturally stiff limb. He saw them not as inert objects, but as characters in a play, their positions, their gestures, their very presence, all meticulously choreographed. Jessica Riley, his partner, found him hunched over his desk in the squad room, the glow of his monitor illuminating the grim lines on his face. "Anything, Mike? You look like you're trying to read their minds." Miller didn't look up. "Their minds or his? He's telling us something, Jess. Every single one of them. It's a twisted narrative, and we're missing the prologue." The forensic team, led by the meticulous Dr. Evelyn Reed, had been working tirelessly. Their initial reports confirmed what Miller already suspected. No usable fingerprints on the mannequins, no foreign DNA, nothing that directly screamed killer. The scene was sterile, almost surgical in its precision, save for the horrifying central display. But Dr. Reed, a woman with an uncanny eye for the anomalous, had called Miller an hour ago, her voice tight with a peculiar urgency. "Detective Miller," she'd begun, "we found something unusual. Not what you'd typically expect from a retail mannequin." She explained that while most of the mannequins were standard commercial models, one in particular stood out. It was the one positioned closest to the victim, the one whose plastic hand had been replaced with the victim's own severed limb. "Its construction is different," Dr. Reed elaborated. "Heavier, more robust, almost custom-made. And the composite material, it has a unique density. But more importantly, there's a seam, almost imperceptible, running along the torso, meticulously sealed." Miller felt a jolt. "A seam? What kind of seam?" "Like it was designed to open," Reed confirmed, her voice now tinged with a professional excitement mixed with unease. "We had to be incredibly careful not to damage it, but we found a small, almost invisible latch mechanism. Inside there was something." Miller had ordered the mannequin to be brought immediately to the precinct's secure evidence lab. Now, he and Jessica stood beside Dr. Reed, watching as she, with the precision of a surgeon, activated the hidden latch. The torso of the mannequin split open with a soft click, revealing a shallow, hollow cavity within. And inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet fabric, was a single disturbing object. It was a small porcelain doll. Not a child's toy, but an antique, exquisitely crafted figurine, perhaps 5 inches tall. Its face was painted with an unervingly serene expression, its tiny hands clasped together, and its eyes, dark and vacant, seemed to gaze directly at Miller. Around its neck on a thin silver chain hung a miniature ornate key. The air in the lab grew heavy, thick with unspoken questions. "What the hell is this?" Jessica whispered, her usual composure momentarily shaken. Miller reached for the doll, but Dr. Reed gently stopped him. "Gloves, detective. We don't know what residual evidence might be on it." Carefully, Miller donned a pair of latex gloves and lifted the doll. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, its porcelain surface cool beneath his touch. The key, no larger than his thumbnail, seemed almost too delicate to be functional. "It's not related to the victim, is it?" he asked, looking at Dr. Reed. She shook her head. "No obvious connection. No DNA. No fibers from the victim's clothing. It's pristine." almost like it was placed there just moments before. "A calling card," Miller murmured, his eyes fixed on the doll's placid face. "A signature. He wants us to know this is more than just a random act of violence." They consulted with Dr. Anya Sharma, the department's lead psychological profiler. Dr. Sharma, a woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper intuition, studied the photos of the doll and the mannequin with a grim fascination. "This," she began, tapping a finger on the image of the porcelain doll, "changes things. This isn't just about staging a scene. This is about narrative. The killer isn't just a murderer, he's a storyteller, and he's using the mannequins as his cast, and this doll. This is a significant symbol in his personal mythology." "Personal mythology?" Jessica questioned. "Precisely. The antique nature of the doll, its innocence juxtaposed with the brutality of the crime scene. The hidden compartment, the meticulous placement. This speaks to an individual who is highly intelligent, deeply narcissistic, and likely suffering from a severe personality disorder. He's not just killing, he's creating. These aren't victims to him, they're characters. And he's inviting you, Detective Miller, to be part of his audience. Or perhaps his next character." Miller felt a prickle of unease at her words. "What about the key?" "A symbol of access," Dr. Sharma mused. "Access to a secret, a locked memory, a hidden place. Or perhaps a challenge. Find what this key unlocks, and you'll find a piece of his puzzle." The custom-made mannequin itself became a new focal point. Dr. Reed's team had discovered a faint, almost microscopic alphanumeric code etched onto the inside of its hollow torso, near the hidden compartment. It wasn't a standard manufacturer serial number, but something more akin to a batch code from a specialized artisan. After hours of cross-referencing databases for obscure prop makers, custom mannequin fabricators, and specialized art suppliers, Jessica finally hit pay dirt. The code led them to a small, almost forgotten workshop tucked away in a quiet industrial corner of the city, miles from the bustling downtown. The sign above the door read, "Finch's Figurines, Custom Artistry in Form." The workshop was a dusty, cluttered treasure trove of headless torsos, dismembered limbs, and figures in various stages of completion. Plaster dust lay thick on every surface, and the air smelled of resin and paint. An elderly man, thin and stooped, with spectacles perched on his nose and hands stained with pigments, looked up as they entered. This was Arthur Finch. "Detectives," he said, his voice raspy. "What can I do for you?" He seemed more curious than alarmed. His eyes, though aged, held a keen intelligence. Miller held up a photograph of the custom mannequin. "Mr. Finch, do you recognize this?" Arthur Finch took the photo, his brow furrowing as he studied it. He ran a gnarled finger over the image of the mannequin's torso. "Ah yes, my work. Distinctive, isn't it? The polymer composite, the reinforced joints. Takes a special kind of client to appreciate the craftsmanship." "You made this specific mannequin?" Jessica pressed. "Indeed," Finch nodded slowly. "About 6 months ago, I'd say. A custom order. Very particular specifications." He squinted at the photo again. "The hidden compartment, yes, that was a special request. An unusual one, I must admit. Most clients want a standard display piece, or maybe something for a museum exhibit. But this gentleman, he wanted a secret. Can you describe him, Mr. Finch?" Miller asked, leaning forward. Arthur Finch paused, his gaze drifting to a half-finished sculpture of a ballet dancer. He was nondescript in a way. Tall, average build. Always wore a hat pulled low. Dark, unremarkable clothing. But his eyes were intense. Like he was seeing something you weren't. And he was very precise. Obsessively so. He knew exactly what he wanted. The specific shade of skin tone, the exact curvature of the spine, the articulation of the fingers. He even provided a reference image for the face, though I customized it to avoid direct replication. "A reference image?" Jessica asked, exchanging a glance with Miller. "Yes, a photograph. A very old, faded photograph of a young woman. He wanted the mannequin to possess a certain austere beauty. He called it a kind of melancholy grace. Said it was for a personal art project. Insisted on the hidden compartment for sentimental items." "Did he give you a name? An address?" Miller pushed, his heart pounding with the proximity of a real lead. Finch walked over to a cluttered desk, sifting through a stack of old invoices and order forms. He found a yellowed sheet of paper. Here it is. Paid in cash naturally. Gave the name Mr. Silas Blackwood. And an address. A warehouse on the old industrial strip, near the derelict textile mills. He handed the invoice to Miller. Miller felt a surge of adrenaline. Silas Blackwood. It sounded almost too theatrical, too perfect, but the address was concrete. The old industrial strip was a forgotten part of the city, a place where crumbling brick buildings stood as monuments to a bygone era. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," Miller said, pocketing the invoice. "You've been a great help." As they left the dusty workshop, the silence of the street felt unnaturally heavy. Jessica typed the address into her patrol car's GPS, derelict textile mills. Sounds like his kind of place. The drive was tense, the city slowly giving way to forgotten industrial decay. When they finally arrived at the address, they found a sprawling, abandoned warehouse, its windows boarded up, its brick facade crumbling. A chain-link fence, rusted and torn, surrounded the property. "Looks abandoned for years," Jessica observed, her hand on her service weapon. "Are we sure this is right?" Miller's eyes scanned the desolate landscape. A faint, almost imperceptible glow emanated from a gap in the boarded-up windows on the second floor. "Someone's been here," he stated, pulling out his own weapon. "And recently." They found a single unsecured service door at the rear of the building, almost swallowed by overgrown weeds. It creaked open into a cavernous, darkened space, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing towering stacks of forgotten machinery, draped in cobwebs. Then they saw it. In the center of the vast, empty floor, illuminated by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, was another tableau. More mannequins. Dozens of them. Arranged in a circle, their plastic faces turned inward, as if observing a central event. But there was no victim this time. Instead, in the very center of the circle, stood a single custom-made mannequin, identical to the one found at the crime scene. But this one was holding something new. It was a small, neatly folded piece of paper, and on it, scrawled in elegant, precise handwriting, were 5 chilling words, addressed directly to him. "Hello, Detective Miller. Did you miss me?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The vibrant chaos of the crime scene, the flashing lights, the hushed urgency of the forensics team, all faded into a dull hum as he stared at the words. "Hello, Detective Miller. Did you miss me?" The ink, a deep, unsettling black, seemed to pulse on the paper, a mocking heartbeat in his trembling hand. His breath hitched, the air, already thick with the metallic tang of blood and the sterile scent of disinfectant, suddenly felt impossibly thin, suffocating him. He felt an icy tendril of dread coil around his spine, squeezing the breath from his lungs. This wasn't just a crime anymore. This was a direct challenge. A personal message from a ghost he didn't know he had. Officer Davis, noticing the sudden rigidity in Miller's posture, the way his knuckles had gone white around the small piece of paper, stepped closer. "Detective? Is everything all right?" Miller couldn't speak. He simply extended his hand, the note still clutched within it. Davis took it, his brow furrowed in concern. As his eyes scanned the elegant script, his own face paled. What is this?" he whispered, glancing from the note to the unnerving mannequin, then back to Miller. Dr. Chun, ever observant, approached, her gaze sharp. "What's happened, Detective?" She saw the note in Davis's hand, the palpable tension radiating from both men. "May I see that, officer?" Davis handed it over, his voice barely audible. "It's for Detective Miller." Dr. Chen's professional demeanor wavered for a fraction of a second as she read the chilling message. Her eyes, usually analytical and detached, now held a flicker of genuine alarm. "This changes everything," she stated, her voice low and grave. She carefully took out an evidence bag, using gloved hands to slide the note inside. Handwriting analysis, paper fibers, latent prints. This is now paramount. Miller finally found his voice, though it was raspy, strained. "It's a taunt. A game." He looked around the scene, a sickening realization dawning on him. This isn't just about the victims anymore, is it? It's about me. The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, yet undeniably true. The meticulous staging, the silent, watchful mannequins, the escalating brutality. It all clicked into place with a horrifying precision. This killer wasn't just a sadist. They were a puppeteer, and Miller was their chosen audience. Or perhaps their next victim. Did you miss me? The words echoed in his mind, a venomous whisper. Who could this be? Had he crossed paths with someone so profoundly disturbed, so deeply vengeful, that they would orchestrate such a macabre spectacle years later? His career had been long, filled with shadows and monsters, but none had ever felt this intimately tied to him, this personally vindictive. He tried to sift through the archives of his memory, searching for a face, a name, a case that resonated with this twisted sentiment. Was it a perp he'd put away who had since been released? A mastermind who'd slipped through his fingers? The victim's family member who blamed him for a miscarriage of justice? The possibilities swirled, each more unsettling than the last. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Every past decision, every arrest, every interrogation, every unsolved lead, suddenly felt like a potential trigger for this nightmare. "Detective Miller," Dr. Chan said, her voice cutting through his internal turmoil. "We need to process this scene thoroughly. But you need to start thinking hard. Who would send you this?" He nodded, his jaw tight. "I need to go back to the precinct. I need to pull up everything. Every cold case, every perp review, every threat assessment I've ever been involved in." Davis put a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of quiet support. "I'll come with you. We'll go through it together." But Miller knew this was a journey he had to embark on alone, at least initially. The message was for him. The answer, if there was one, lay buried in his own professional past. He felt a profound sense of isolation, despite the bustling activity around him. This killer had reached across time, across the barrier of anonymity, and plucked him out, making him the central figure in their gruesome play. Back at the precinct, the fluorescent lights of his office seemed to mock the darkness that had settled in his mind. He ignored the sympathetic glances from colleagues, the questions about the latest bizarre crime scene. His focus was singular, obsessive. He sat at his desk, the glow of his computer screen illuminating the grim set of his features. He started with his earliest cases, scrolling through digital files, then moving on to dusty physical folders retrieved from the archives. He was looking for a pattern, a signature, anything that screamed Mannequin, or personal vendetta, or theatrical display. He remembered a case from nearly 15 years ago, early in his detective career, that had haunted him for years. A series of disappearances, all young women, all with a strange artistic bent. The killer, dubbed the Collector by the media, had never been caught. The only evidence left behind was always a single, exquisitely crafted porcelain doll, dressed in the victim's clothes, placed meticulously at the last known location. He'd poured years into that case, the victims' faces etched into his memory, the frustration of the dead ends a constant ache. But the Collector had never sent him a personal message. The dolls were silent, beautiful, and utterly terrifying in their symbolism. Could it be the Collector, now evolved, using mannequins instead of dolls, escalating from disappearances to brutal murders? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. No, the Collector's modus operandi was different, more subtle, less overtly violent. The current killer reveled in the grotesque, in the public display. He moved on, his fingers flying across the keyboard, opening files, scanning reports. Cases involving stalkers, escapees, individuals with a history of fixation or grandiosity. He remembered a notorious serial arsonist he'd put away a decade ago, a man who'd burned down buildings important to his victims, leaving behind cryptic notes about purification. But his notes were always scrawled, messy, full of rage, not the elegant precision of the "did you miss me?" message. Hours blurred into a relentless, agonizing search. The precinct emptied, the sounds of distant traffic replacing the earlier hum of activity. He was alone, surrounded by the ghosts of his past investigations. Davis had tried to stay, bringing him coffee, offering to help, but Miller had politely, firmly sent him home, needing to confront this specter on his own terms. His eyes were gritty, his head throbbing. He was about to give up, to admit defeat, when a name buried deep in an old cold case file caught his attention. Eleanor Vance. The Vance case. It was from his early days as a detective, a bizarre, unsettling series of events that had never quite sat right with him, even after the arrests. Eleanor Vance, a brilliant but deeply disturbed artist, had been obsessed with the concept of living sculptures. She had run a small avant-garde gallery that featured unsettling, hyper-realistic mannequins, often posed in disturbing tableaus. She had been the primary suspect in the disappearance of several models who had worked for her, But the evidence was circumstantial, and the bodies were never found. She had been committed to a psychiatric facility after a dramatic breakdown, deemed unfit to stand trial for a lesser charge of assault. Miller remembered the chilling precision of her art, the way her mannequin seemed to stare with unnerving sentience. He remembered a specific incident during the investigation. They had raided her studio, and she had simply smiled, a serene, unsettling smile, as she pointed to a mannequin dressed in one of the missing model's clothes. Tucked into its hand, just like the note today, had been a small folded piece of paper. He quickly opened the digital file, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He scrolled down past the police reports, the witness statements, the psychiatric evaluations, and then he saw it. A photograph taken during the studio raid. A close-up of the note found with the mannequin. His breath hitched, caught in his throat. The handwriting was identical, elegant, precise, almost calligraphic. But it wasn't the handwriting that made the blood drain from his face, turning his skin to a sickly gray. It was the message, scrawled on that old, faded piece of paper, addressed to no one in particular, yet clearly meant for whoever found it, were 3 words. 3 words that now echoed through the silent precinct, confirming his worst, most terrifying fear. The show begins. The 3 words hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement that resonated deep within Detective Miller's bones. The show begins. It wasn't a threat, not in the conventional sense, but a chilling invitation, a declaration of intent from a mind so twisted, so audacious, that it sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just a murder. It was a prelude, an opening act in a macabre performance. He stared at the faded slip of paper, the ink a dark smudge against the aged fibers. It was old, deliberately chosen, perhaps to evoke a sense of timelessness, or perhaps just to hinder forensic analysis. Whoever had penned these words wasn't just a killer, but a showman, a director orchestrating a terrifying play, and Miller and his team were now unwilling participants, thrust onto the stage. Captain Davis, his face etched with a mix of disbelief and grim resignation, ran a hand over his bald head. A show? What in God's name is this person talking about? Detective Rodriguez, usually quick with a sarcastic remark, was silent, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The implications were clear, stark, and terrifying. They weren't looking for a killer who struck once and vanished into the shadows. They were hunting a predator who intended to make a spectacle of their violence, a serial offender with a theatrical flair. Miller finally broke the silence, his voice low, strained. It means Sarah Jenkins wasn't the end. She was just the curtain raiser. The show, it's just getting started. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The meticulous staging, the eerie spotlight, the mannequin. It all made a horrifying kind of sense now. It wasn't just a bizarre crime scene, it was a set. The precinct buzzed with a new frantic energy. The discovery of the note had shifted the entire paradigm of the investigation. Every piece of evidence, every detail they had painstakingly collected, now had to be reevaluated through the lens of a deranged theatrical production. Forensics swarmed over the note, meticulously searching for fingerprints, analyzing the paper, the ink, the handwriting, anything that could offer a clue to their elusive director. Miller called an emergency briefing, the tension in the room palpable. He laid out the facts, the chilling message, the new understanding of their adversary. This isn't random. This isn't impulsive. This is planned, orchestrated with a specific audience in mind, us. And the show begins implies there will be subsequent acts. A junior detective, Michael Chun, raised a hand, his brow furrowed. So the mannequin, was it part of the set for the first act, or is it something more? Miller turned to a large, projected image of the mannequin, its eerily lifelike features staring out at them. That's the million-dollar question, Michael. Was it just a prop? Or does it hold a deeper significance? Was it meant to taunt us? Or is it a key to understanding what comes next? He paused, letting the silence build. We need to go back over everything. Every single detail about that mannequin. It's not just a prop anymore. It's a character. Its construction, its materials, its origin, everything. We need to find out why this mannequin, and why it was so meticulously placed. The team scattered, a renewed sense of urgency propelling them forward. Rodriguez, her usual cynicism replaced by a grim determination, pulled Miller aside. This killer, they're not just violent, they're smart. They're playing a game, Miller. And the rules are changing with every discovery. I know, Jessica. Miller replied, rubbing his temples. "And the worst part is we don't even know what the game is or what the prize is. But we have to assume the next act is already in motion or being planned." He found himself drawn back to the evidence room, specifically to the mannequin. It stood under the harsh fluorescent lights, stripped of its clothes, its limbs articulated for forensic examination. Its eyes, those unsettlingly realistic eyes, seemed to follow him. He remembered the first time he saw it, the way it had seemed to breathe, to hold a secret. Now that feeling was amplified 1,000-fold. It wasn't just a retail display model. Its skin, made of some advanced polymer, felt almost warm to the touch, mimicking human flesh with uncanny precision. The hair, individually implanted, was undeniably real, not synthetic. This was no ordinary mannequin. This was a custom-made creation, an expensive, highly specialized piece of artistry. Who makes something like this? Miller muttered to himself, circling the figure. And why use it for a murder? He remembered the forensic report detailing the subtle modifications. The small incision near the collarbone, precisely made, yet leaving no trace of the object it had contained. The internal structure, surprisingly complex, with weight distribution designed for natural movement and balance. It wasn't just a dummy. It was a marvel of engineering. Suddenly, a thought struck him, a cold, unsettling realization that chilled him to the core. The note. The show begins. What if the mannequin wasn't just part of the show, but a central figure? What if it wasn't just a prop, but a messenger? He leaned closer, examining the neck, the shoulders, the torso. The polymer skin was seamless, but he recalled the report mentioning a slight discoloration, a faint scar-like line near the left shoulder blade, initially dismissed as a manufacturing defect or minor damage. But now, with the new context, everything changed. He remembered the meticulousness of the killer, the precision of the crime scene. There were no defects. There were only intentions. He called for the forensic team to return to the mannequin immediately. "I want a full, top-to-bottom, microscopic examination of every inch of this thing. Every seam, every joint, every strand of hair. Pay particular attention to that faint line on the shoulder blade. I want to know if it's an incision, covered up, sealed." Dr. Evelyn Reed, the lead forensic pathologist, arrived, her expression professional but tinged with curiosity. "Another look at our silent observer, detective?" "More than an observer, Evelyn," Miller said, his voice tight with anticipation. "I think it's got something to tell us. That scar-like mark, I have a feeling it's not a defect. I think it's a hidden compartment or a previous entry point. This killer isn't just staging scenes. I think they're using the mannequin to communicate." Dr. Reed, intrigued, began her work, her gloved fingers meticulously tracing the hairline fracture on the mannequin's shoulder. She used a specialized light, then a small high-magnification camera. After several tense minutes, a gasp escaped her lips. "You were right, detective," she said, her voice hushed. "It's not a defect. It's a perfectly sealed incision, almost invisible to the naked eye, but it's there. And it's not a simple cut. It's designed to be opened and resealed without leaving a trace." Her team carefully worked at the seam, using microtools to avoid any damage. The tension in the room became unbearable. Miller felt his heart hammering against his ribs. What would they find? Another cryptic message? A clue to the killer's identity? Or something far more sinister? Finally, with a soft click, a small section of the mannequin's shoulder popped open, revealing a shallow, hollow compartment within the polymer shell. Inside, nestled snugly, was a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper, no larger than a postage stamp. It was identical in texture and age to the first note, the same faded hue, the same delicate fibers. Dr. Reed carefully extracted it with tweezers, placing it on a sterile tray. Miller leaned over, his eyes fixed on the minuscule artifact. He could just make out faint, almost imperceptible lines of text, written in the same precise, elegant hand as before. He held his breath as Dr. Reed, using a magnifying glass, began to read the words aloud, her voice barely a whisper in the silent room. "Act 2, she began, her voice trembling slightly. "The audience." Miller felt a cold wave wash over him. Act 2. The audience. It confirmed his worst fears. The show had indeed begun, and they were the unwilling spectators, trapped in a killer's twisted theater. But what did the audience mean? Was it a reference to the next victim? Or was it something far more chilling? Was the killer planning to involve them in a more direct, horrifying way? The full terror of the situation crashed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The killer was not just performing for them. They were making them part of the performance. And the next act, whatever it was already underway. The full terror of the situation crashed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The killer was not just performing for them. They were making them part of the performance. And the next act, whatever it was already underway. Miller felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a feeling far more unsettling than any he'd experienced at the previous crime scenes. Those were static, horrifying puzzles. This, however, was a living, breathing threat, an interactive horror show where he and his team were unwilling participants. Everywhere he looked, he saw the killer's unseen eyes, felt the weight of their judgment. He imagined them somewhere watching, waiting for their next cue. The thought sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. He snapped out of his stupor, his mind racing. Ramirez, we need to lock down everything. Every lead, every piece of evidence, every theory. This isn't a series of isolated incidents anymore. This is a narrative and we're in it. Detective Ramirez, her face pale, nodded grimly. You think the next move is aimed at us directly? I don't think. I know, Miller said, his voice tight with a newfound urgency. The killer isn't just leaving messages at the scenes. They're orchestrating the entire investigation as part of their twisted show. The mannequins, they're not just props. They're the audience or perhaps the critics. And we're the performers. The implications were staggering. Every press conference, every leaked detail, every theory they discussed in the precinct. It was all fodder for the killer's macabre entertainment. They had been playing right into their hands, unknowingly following a script written by a psychopath. The realization fueled a surge of adrenaline, cutting through the fear. He wouldn't be a puppet. He wouldn't dance to this killer's tune. He would find them. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was different. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a tense, focused energy. Every officer, every analyst felt the unseen pressure. They were no longer just tracking a murderer. They were engaged in a deadly psychological chess match. But the killer had made the first move, and now they were waiting for the response. Hours blurred into an exhausting search for any new anomaly, any deviation from the pattern, anything that might signify the next act. Miller was hunched over a map of the city, crisscrossed with pins marking previous crime scenes, trying to discern a new pattern, a sequence, a rhythm to the killer's deadly ballet. Ramirez was on the phone, her voice low and urgent, following up on a tip about a suspicious package delivered to a local news station. But it turned out to be a dead end, a prank. The clock ticked, each second amplifying the silence, the expectation. Where would the killer strike next? Or more terrifyingly, how? Then it happened. Not a new crime scene, not a dramatic public display. It was far more insidious, far more personal. A uniformed officer, a young man named Officer David Chun, approached Miller's desk, a bewildered expression on his face, holding a small, nondescript cardboard box. Detective Miller? This just came in. Special delivery addressed to you personally. No return address. Just for Detective Michael Miller. Miller's blood ran cold. He felt every eye in the bullpen turn towards him. This was it. The next act. He took the box, his hand steady despite the tremor in his gut. It was unexpectedly heavy for its size, maybe 8 by 8 inches. The tape sealing it was meticulously applied, almost too neat. He glanced at Ramirez, who was already standing, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. "Everyone stand back," Miller commanded, his voice echoing with authority. He moved to an empty conference table in the corner, away from the main flow of the precinct. Ramirez joined him, along with Sergeant Evelyn Hayes, the head of their forensics unit, a woman known for her calm demeanor under pressure. Carefully, Miller used a pen to break the tape, peeling back the flaps of the cardboard. Inside, nestled securely in a bed of shredded paper, was a miniature stage. It was exquisite, disturbingly so. Crafted from dark, polished wood, it was no larger than a shoebox, yet perfectly detailed. Tiny velvet curtains, deep crimson, were drawn back to reveal a meticulously painted backdrop depicting a dark, moonlit alley, eerily similar to the scene of their very first mannequin discovery. And on the stage in the center stood two figures. One was a miniature mannequin, perhaps 3 inches tall, dressed in a tiny, perfectly tailored suit. Its face was unnervingly lifelike, A chillingly accurate rendition of their first victim, Mr. Harrison. Every detail was there. The slightly thinning hair, the specific cut of his jacket, even the faint lines on his face. Next to it, slightly larger, stood another figure. This one was dressed in a miniature police uniform, complete with tiny badges and a miniature belt. Its face, cast in a pale resin, was unmistakably his. Detective Michael Miller. A gasp escaped Ramirez's lips. Sergeant Hayes's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock crossing her usually impassive face. Miller felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a threat, it was a profound violation. The killer had studied him, sculpted him, placed him on a stage as a character in their play. He was no longer just an investigator, he was a prop. He reached into the box again, carefully sifting through the shredded paper. His fingers brushed against something stiff. He pulled it out. It was a single sheet of heavy parchment paper, folded once. He unfolded it. The words, written in elegant, almost calligraphic script, were chillingly precise. "My dearest Director Miller." The opening act was a triumph, wouldn't you agree? The audience was captivated, the critics, well, they're always so demanding. But true art demands participation, doesn't it? A performance is nothing without its players, its actors, its lead. And you, my dear detective, are perfectly cast. You've been so diligent, so keen to follow the script. But now it's time for improvisation. The stage is set, the spotlight awaits. Look closely at the audience. They're always watching, always judging. And one of them, it seems, is ready for their curtain call. The next scene begins at sundown. The address is 472 Elmwood Lane. Don't miss your cue, director. The show must go on. Curtain. Miller read the note aloud, his voice low and strained, the words hanging heavy in the silent room. When he finished, the only sound was the frantic beating of his own heart. "For 72 Elmwood Lane," Ramirez whispered, pulling out her phone. That's a residential address. A quiet neighborhood. An audience," Sergeant Hayes murmured, her gaze fixed on the miniature stage. "The killer is telling us to look at the mannequins, the audience at the crime scenes. One of them holds a key." Miller's mind was reeling. The killer wasn't just taunting them. They were giving them a direct instruction, a challenge. And the mention of sundown meant they had mere hours. "Get me everything on 472 Elmwood Lane," Miller barked, snapping into action. "Owner history, residence, any prior police calls, anything. Ramirez, you're with me. Sergeant Hayes, get a team sifting through every piece of evidence from the previous scenes. Focus on the mannequins. Is there anything we missed? A hidden compartment, a coded message, a micro-engraving? Something that links to this." He gestured wildly at the miniature stage and the note. The precinct exploded into a flurry of activity. Officers scrambled, phones rang, keyboards clattered. The sense of urgency was palpable, almost suffocating. They were no longer just reacting. They were being pulled into the killer's elaborate play, forced to follow their cues. Miller stared at the miniature stage, at the tiny version of himself standing beside the victim. The killer had painstakingly created this not just to mock him but to control him, to dictate his next move. The level of detail, the sheer audacity was terrifying. This wasn't just a killer. It was a maestro of mayhem, a twisted artist using human lives as their canvas. "Elmwood Lane," Ramirez said, looking up from her tablet. "It's a single-family home, owned by an older couple, a Mr. and Mrs. Peterson. No criminal record, no known issues. Been there for 40 years. An older couple," Miller repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Another vulnerable target. And the killer is telling us to go there. To perform." The full weight of the killer's game settled on him. This wasn't about catching them after the fact anymore. This was about stopping them before they struck again, about disrupting their performance. But how could he disrupt a performance when he was already on stage, the spotlight on him, and the killer holding the script? He looked at the note again, specifically at the last chilling line. "The show must go on." He clenched his jaw. Not if he could help it. He would tear down their stage, expose them to the light, and end this horrifying production once and for all. But the gnawing fear remained. What if he was just another character, destined to play out a role he couldn't escape? What if the killer had already written his ending? The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long orange shadows across the city. Sundown. The deadline loomed, a horrifying crescendo to this macabre act. Miller knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the killer was watching, waiting for his entrance. And he had no choice but to take the stage. Miller's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the encroaching darkness. He barked orders into his comms, his voice tight with urgency. Lock down the grid. I need eyes on every alley, every rooftop. This isn't just a chase anymore. It's a performance. And I'm the lead act. He slammed the patrol car door shut, the engine roaring to life. The first instruction from the killer had been chillingly simple. Go to where the echoes of childhood dreams are loudest, but only when the sun kisses the horizon for the last time. Miller knew exactly where that was. The old abandoned amusement park on the city's outskirts. Dreamland Pier. A relic from a bygone era, now a skeletal monument of rusted steel and faded paint. A place where joy had curdled into decay. It was a place he hadn't visited since he was a kid. A place he'd chosen to forget, like many other painful memories. The killer, it seemed, knew his past intimately. The drive was a blur of flashing lights and desperate thoughts. He kept replaying the case file in his head, searching for any connection to Dreamland Pier. Was it one of the victims? A family member? Or was it something else, something deeper tied to Miller himself? The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. The killer wasn't just playing games. He was excavating Miller's life, piece by painful piece. As his cruiser screeched to a halt outside the crumbling gates of Dreamland, the last slivers of orange light bled from the sky. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, and an unnerving silence. The rusted Ferris wheel stood sentinel against the twilight, its empty carriages swaying mournfully in the wind. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a mausoleum of forgotten laughter. He stepped out, his hand instinctively resting on his holstered weapon. Miller here, he radioed, his voice hushed. I'm at Dreamland Pier. Perimeter secure. Negative, detective, came the crackle of Jessica's voice. Our surveillance choppers are having trouble with interference over that sector. It's like a dead zone. We're sending ground units, but they're still 10 minutes out. Miller swore under his breath. A dead zone? Of course. The killer had planned this meticulously, isolating him. He pushed through the broken turnstiles, the sound of crunching gravel beneath his boots the only disturbance. The park was a labyrinth of forgotten rides, twisted metal and overgrown weeds. The killer's next message had appeared on his burner phone just moments before he arrived. Asterisk, find the carousel. The truth spins within its gilded cage. Asterisk. The carousel. He remembered it vividly from his childhood. A magnificent, ornate structure, horses frozen mid-gallop, their painted eyes staring out with a silent plea. He navigated through the ghostly arcade, past shattered funhouse mirrors that distorted his reflection into grotesque shapes. Each step felt heavy, laden with an unseen presence. He kept checking his surroundings, his senses on high alert, but saw nothing, heard nothing but the wind whistling through the derelict structures. Finally, he saw it. The carousel. It stood in the center of a wide, overgrown plaza, its once vibrant colors now muted by time and neglect. The canopy was tattered, and some of the horses had fallen from their mounts, lying on their sides like forgotten toys. But one horse, a pure white stallion with a flowing mane, remained perfectly upright, somehow untouched by the decay. And on its back, a mannequin. Miller approached cautiously, his heart pounding. This mannequin was different from the others. It wasn't posed dramatically. It was simply sitting, staring straight ahead, its glassy eyes reflecting the last vestiges of twilight. As he got closer, he saw a small, intricately folded piece of paper tucked into its hand. He retrieved the note, his fingers trembling slightly. The paper was old, yellowed, and felt like parchment. He unfolded it carefully. The message was written in elegant, looping script, almost artistic. Asterisk, the eyes that see everything yet see nothing. The voice that tells stories, yet remains silent. Look closer, detective. The answers are in plain sight if you only choose to see past the obvious. Asterisk. Miller frowned, his mind racing. The eyes that see everything yet see nothing. The voice that tells stories yet remains silent. It sounded like a riddle but also a description. He looked at the mannequin. Its eyes were fixed, unseeing. Its mouth was a painted curve, forever silent. Was it referring to the mannequin itself? Or something else at the carousel? He circled the carousel, inspecting each horse, each decorative element. He ran his hands over the peeling paint, the carved details. Nothing. Just dust, rust, and the ghosts of forgotten joy. He felt a surge of frustration, the killer's taunts echoing in his mind. See past the obvious. What wasn't obvious here? Suddenly, his gaze fell upon the central column of the carousel. It was adorned with a series of painted panels, each depicting a different scene from a fairy tale. One panel, depicting a princess in a tower, seemed slightly out of place. The paint was newer, less faded than the others. He pressed against it. It didn't budge. He tapped it. It sounded solid. He looked back at the mannequin, then at the note. The eyes that see everything, yet see nothing. He remembered the first victim, Sarah Jenkins, found with her eyes meticulously painted open. The second, David Chun, his mouth sewn shut. The third, Emily Davis, a small, intricate carving on her wrist, a spiral. The killer was obsessed with sensory organs, with communication, with perception. He looked at the white stallion where the mannequin sat. Its eyes, they were painted with an unusual intensity, a striking blue that seemed too vibrant for the decaying park. He knelt, examining the horse's head. He noticed a faint seam, almost imperceptible, along the jawline. He ran his finger along it. It was a compartment. With a grunt of effort, he pried it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small antique music box. It was a delicate thing, crafted from dark wood, with intricate silver filigree. He picked it up, feeling its weight. As he turned it over, he saw a tiny, almost invisible inscription on the bottom. For my dearest Sarah. Sarah Jenkins. The first victim. A surge of adrenaline coursed through Miller. This was a direct link, a personal artifact. He carefully wound the music box. A hauntingly beautiful melody began to play. A tune he vaguely recognized from his childhood. A lullaby. But as the music played, something else happened. The central column of the carousel, the one with the out-of-place panel, began to slowly rotate, revealing a hidden compartment within. Inside the compartment, bathed in the dim light of his flashlight, was not another mannequin, but a series of photographs meticulously arranged. They weren't crime scene photos. They were old, faded snapshots from what looked like a summer camp. Children laughing, playing, posing awkwardly. And among them, a familiar face, younger, beaming. Sarah Jenkins. Next to her, a boy with bright, inquisitive eyes. And then a photo that made Miller's breath catch in his throat. A group photo circa 25 years ago. A young Sarah, a younger David Chun, a young Emily Davis. And standing slightly apart from the group, a shy, serious-looking boy. His gaze directed not at the camera, but at Sarah. His face, though younger, was strikingly familiar. It was a face he had seen countless times in the mirror. It was him. A younger detective, Miller. His mind reeled. The killer knew him. Not just as a detective, not just from the case, but from his past. From his childhood. The amusement park, the lullaby, the victims. They were all connected to that summer camp, to him. The killer wasn't just a random psychopath. He was a ghost from Miller's past, meticulously orchestrating a twisted reunion. He shuffled through the photos, his hands shaking, each one a piece of a puzzle he never knew existed. The joy, the innocence captured in those frames, now felt like a cruel mockery. He remembered that summer. His parents had been going through a rough patch, and he'd been sent away to Camp Evergreen, a place he'd tried hard to forget. He'd been a quiet kid, a loner, but Sarah, with her infectious laugh, had always been kind to him. He looked at the last photo in the stack. It was a close-up of a group of children gathered around a small wooden birdhouse that hung from a tree. Sarah was pointing at something inside it, smiling. Next to her, a boy with messy brown hair and a mischievous grin. He recognized him too. Michael Jenkins, Sarah's older brother. He had been a few years older than Miller, a charismatic and protective figure. He remembered Michael fondly, a good kid, full of life. But then a flicker of memory. A tragedy. A sudden disappearance. An accident, they said. Michael had drowned in the camp lake. His body was never found. The camp had closed down shortly after. Miller stared at the photo of Michael, a cold dread settling in his stomach. Michael Jenkins, Sarah's brother. The music box was inscribed, "For my dearest Sarah." The killer had lured him to a place from his past, connected to the victims, and now to a tragedy that had haunted him subconsciously for decades. He looked back at the mannequin on the white stallion, its unseeing eyes now seeming to mock him, the eyes that see everything yet see nothing. The mannequin wasn't just a prop, it was a symbol, a stand-in, a representation of the unseeing public, the unseeing authorities, perhaps even the unseeing Miller himself, who had failed to see the truth behind Michael's disappearance. A new message pinged on his burner phone. This one was shorter, more direct. Asterisk, the final stage awaits where the silence is absolute, and the water remembers all. Bring the music box. And come alone. Your 10 minutes are up. Hope you remember the way, Miller. Or perhaps you never forgot. Asterisk, the silence is absolute, and the water remembers all. The camp lake. Michael's drowning. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The killer wasn't just a ghost from his past. The killer was Michael. Or someone who believed they were Michael or was seeking vengeance for him. The man who had been presumed dead for decades was back, and he was taking his revenge, one painful memory, one life at a time. And Miller, the quiet boy from Camp Evergreen, was now trapped in his elaborate, deadly play. He clutched the music box, its lullaby still faintly echoing in his mind, a harbinger of the chilling confrontation to come. He had no choice but to follow. The lake, the final stage, and the truth waiting to be dredged from its dark, silent depths. The cold, damp air bit at Michael's exposed skin, a stark contrast to the burning dread in his gut. The music box, a silent, weighty presence in his hand, felt like a ticking bomb. Each turn of the wheel, each creak of the suspension in his old sedan, echoed the frantic beat of his own heart. The road to Lake Juniper was winding, shadowed by ancient pines that clawed at the moonless sky, their branches like skeletal fingers pointing towards an inevitable, chilling destiny. His mind raced, piecing together fragments. The cryptic notes, the unsettling surveillance, the mannequin's haunting presence, the lullaby that had wormed its way into his subconscious. It all pointed to one person, one twisted obsession. Jessica. And now the lake. He pulled up to the desolate shore, the headlights cutting through the inky blackness, revealing only the lapping water and the silhouettes of distant trees. But then a flicker, a faint glow near the water's edge. He killed the engine, plunging the world into silence save for the gentle whisper of the lake. He grabbed the music box and stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots, each sound amplified in the oppressive stillness. There she was, Jessica, standing by the water, her back to him, a figure of unsettling calm. And beside her, impossibly, chillingly, stood the mannequin. Its vacant eyes seemed to stare out into the dark expanse of the lake, a silent sentinel. The faint glow came from a single lantern she held, casting long dancing shadows that made the scene even more surreal, more terrifying. Jessica. Michael's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper against the vast silence. She turned slowly, her face illuminated by the lantern, revealing an expression he couldn't quite decipher. A strange mix of sorrow, anticipation, and something utterly vacant. Michael. You came. Her voice was soft, devoid of surprise, as if she had always known he would. What is this, Jessica? He held up the music box, its delicate carvings catching the lantern light. What is all of this? The house, the notes, the mannequin. He gestured wildly towards the silent figure beside her. Who is she? Why have you done all of this? Jessica's gaze drifted to the mannequin, a tender, almost maternal look softening her features. She's Emily. My Emily. Her voice was a fragile whisper, laced with a pain so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air. My daughter. She loved this music box. David, my husband, gave it to her. Before he left. After Emily, she was so young. A tear traced a path down her cheek, catching the lantern's glow like a tiny fleeting diamond. Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Emily? But she's not real, Jessica. It's a mannequin. She shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement. She is real to me. The only real thing left after everything was taken. Her eyes, when they met his again, held a desperate, burning intensity. They took my family, Michael. They took my perfect life. David left after Emily's accident. Said he couldn't look at me, couldn't live in a house filled with ghosts. But he was the ghost, leaving me alone with her memory. She extended a hand towards the mannequin, her fingers brushing its plastic shoulder. Emily and I, we were always together. We still are. But what does that have to do with me? With Sarah? The name hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Jessica's face hardened, the sorrow replaced by a chilling resentment. Sarah. She had everything, didn't she? The beautiful house, the perfect garden, the doting husband, the bright, sparkling children. Everything I lost. Everything I deserved. Her voice grew colder, each word precise, cutting. I watched her, Michael. For months. From the shadows. She lived in a dream, a life I should have had. The house, it called to me. It felt like my home. The home Emily deserved to grow up in. Michael felt a wave of nausea. You were stalking her? Observing. Learning. Planning. Jessica corrected, her tone eerily rational. She was careless. She left her front door unlocked one evening. A small mistake, but enough for me to step into the life that was meant to be mine. She paused, her eyes fixed on him, searching for something. It was so easy. She was in her study on the phone. She never even saw me coming. A single swift blow. Clean. Efficient. To make sure she felt no pain, no fear, not like Emily. The confession hung in the air, a grotesque tableau painted by the flickering lantern light. Michael stumbled back, his mind reeling. You killed her? You murdered Sarah. Jessica nodded, a strange calm settling over her. She was an obstacle, a placeholder. Her life, her home, her garden, they were all waiting for us. For Emily and me. And for you, Michael. Me. He choked out, utterly horrified. Yes, you. Her eyes softened again, returning to that unsettling tenderness. You were the missing piece. The kind, gentle man I watched from afar, visiting Sarah sometimes, helping her with repairs. You were always so good with kids. You were meant to be Emily's father. My husband. The one who would complete our perfect family in that perfect house. I was helping a friend, Michael retorted, his voice rising in disbelief. I barely knew Sarah. She was a distant relative who needed help sometimes. A distant relative who named you as her sole heir when she had no one else. Jessica corrected, a faint, almost triumphant smile touching her lips. A convenient twist of fate. It was meant to be. I made sure of it. Altered a few documents, planted a few seeds. It wasn't hard to make it look like a tragic accident, a fall down the stairs. The police were so quick to believe it, to close the case. They never suspected a thing. His blood ran cold. You manipulated everything. You set me up. I merely guided destiny, she countered, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. I wanted to make sure you found the notes, the music box. I wanted you to understand, to feel the pull of our perfect family. The mannequin. She was a constant reminder. A message. Emily was waiting for you to join us. The notes. Our family. Perfection. You were trying to brainwash me. I was trying to show you the truth, Michael. To make you see that we were meant to be. That house, our home, needed its family back. It needed a father for Emily. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing with an almost religious fervor. And now you're here, at the lake. This is where it all began, and where it will finally be complete. Michael looked around frantically. The desolate shore, the dark water, the silent mannequin, and the woman before him, whose sanity had fractured into a mosaic of grief and delusion. Complete what, Jessica? What more could possibly be complete? She smiled, a chillingly sweet expression. Our new beginning. A fresh start. No more ghosts, no more obstacles. Just us. Our perfect family. Forever. Her hand, which had been resting on the mannequin's shoulder, slowly dropped to her side. And in her hand, glinting dully in the lantern light, was a long, slender knife. The blade seemed to drink the light, reflecting it with a dark, hungry gleam. You see, Michael, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. There's one last step to truly solidify our bond. One last sacrifice to make our family truly eternal. And you, my dear, are the perfect offering. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on him, not with malice, but with a terrifying, unwavering certainty. Michael felt a primal scream building in his throat, but no sound escaped. He was frozen, caught in the cold, unyielding gaze of a woman who had lost everything, and was now determined to create her perfect world, even if it meant destroying his. He clutched the music box tighter, its silent weight a poor substitute for a weapon against the chilling conviction in Jessica's eyes, and the glint of the knife that now pointed steadily towards him. He was trapped. The final stage was set. And the truth, now fully dredged from the dark depths, was far more terrifying than any mystery he could have imagined. The knife glinted, a cold promise in the dim light. David's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, each beat a stark reminder of his mortality. Jessica's grip on the handle was steady, her knuckles white. Her eyes, once so warm and inviting, now held a terrifying emptiness, a void that swallowed all reason. "You understand now, don't you, David?" she whispered, her voice a silken thread of malice. "You figured it out just like I knew you would. You were so curious, so determined to see what was behind the curtain." David swallowed, his throat dry. "Jessica, please, this isn't you. You're not a killer." A humorless laugh escaped her lips, a brittle sound that grated on his nerves. "Oh, but it is me, David. More me than I've ever been. You see, Frank, he wasn't a father. He was an interruption, a flaw in the perfect picture." She gestured vaguely around the workshop, her eyes sweeping over the silent, staring mannequins. These are my family. My real family. Always perfect, always poised, always exactly where I want them to be. They don't argue. They don't leave. They don't disappoint." A chill snaked down David's spine. Her obsession wasn't just a hobby. It was a delusion, a meticulously constructed reality. "Frank was going to sell the shop, you know," she continued, her voice growing colder. "He was going to tear down my world. He called them creepy plastic dolls. He called my family creepy. He was going to replace them with some soulless apartment complex. He was going to replace me." Her eyes narrowed, fixing on David with an unnerving intensity. "He replaced my mother. He replaced our family. And then he tried to replace my sanctuary. He had to be stopped. He had to become like them. Silent. Still. Perfect." David felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. The mannequin at the scene, that was Frank, wasn't it? Dressed up, placed there. Jessica's lips curved into a slow, chilling smile. "Brilliant, David. Absolutely brilliant. You really are quite clever. Yes, Frank became my first masterpiece. A statement. A warning. This is what happens when you try to dismantle perfection." "And the others?" David pressed, trying to keep her talking, to buy himself time, his eyes darting around for any potential escape or weapon. The air was thick with the scent of plastic and dust, a macabre perfume. "The others," she mused, a faraway look in her eyes. "They were imperfections. People who got too close, who saw too much, who threatened my peace. The first one, the young man who worked for Frank, he saw me working on Frank. He was going to tell someone. Couldn't have that. The old woman who lived next door, she was always so nosy. Always peering over the fence, asking questions. She saw the van late at night. The delivery driver, he saw the mannequin being moved. His curiosity was inconvenient." She took a step closer, the knife tip now just inches from David's chest. "And then there was you. You were supposed to be a distraction. Clever little game. I planted the clues, the little breadcrumbs. I watched you follow them, so eager, so confident. I thought you would just spin your wheels, blame some phantom killer, and then I could quietly disappear. But you didn't. You kept digging. You kept finding things. You kept getting closer to my family." Her voice dropped to a whisper, laced with pure venom. "And now you know too much, David. Far too much. You want the truth? Here it is. The truth is, some things are better left undisturbed. Some secrets are meant to stay buried in the quiet, perfect world I've created." David's mind raced. He was trapped in a room full of silent witnesses, a gallery of plastic faces watching his impending doom. He had to act. He couldn't just stand there and let her finish him. "You think this makes you powerful, Jessica?" he challenged, trying to inject a tremor of doubt into her chilling resolve. "Killing people, turning them into dolls? You think that's perfection? It's madness. It's pathetic." Her eyes flashed with sudden raw anger. "Pathetic? I've controlled every single step of this investigation. I've made fools of the police. I've made you dance to my tune. How is that pathetic?" "Because you're still hiding, Jessica," David retorted, pushing his luck. "You're still a scared little girl who can't face reality. You're a coward." It worked. The word struck a nerve. Her composure cracked, replaced by a surge of fury. With a guttural cry, she lunged forward, the knife a blur aimed at his chest. David, anticipating her move, reacted purely on instinct. He twisted his body, throwing his weight to the side, narrowly avoiding the lethal thrust. The knife scraped against his jacket, a cold sensation against his skin, missing vital organs by a hair's breadth. He grabbed her wrist, twisting with all his might, trying to disarm her. Jessica was stronger than he expected, fueled by a terrifying, unhinged strength. She resisted, her arm muscles rigid, her teeth gritted. The struggle was desperate, primal. They stumbled backwards, knocking into a display of mannequins. One toppled with a hollow thud, its plastic head rolling across the floor, its blank stare fixed on the ceiling. David knew he couldn't overpower her physically for long. He needed a distraction, an opening. His eyes scanned the cluttered workshop, desperate. He saw a heavy metal wrench lying on a workbench just beyond Jessica's reach. He feigned a collapse, dropping to one knee, pulling Jessica off balance. As she stumbled forward, still grappling with him, he used the momentary advantage. With a surge of adrenaline, he shoved her away with one arm, simultaneously reaching for the wrench. His fingers closed around the cold, heavy metal. Jessica, disoriented but furious, lunged again, the knife flashing. David swung the wrench in a wide, desperate arc. It connected with a sickening thud against her arm, just below the elbow. The knife clattered to the floor, sliding across the polished concrete. A scream of pain and rage ripped from Jessica's throat. She cradled her injured arm, her face contorted. But the madness in her eyes hadn't diminished. If anything, it had intensified. She lunged again, not for the wrench but for David's throat, her uninjured hand clawing, her nails like talons. David stumbled back, hitting a shelf laden with mannequin parts. Heads, arms, and torsos rained down around him, a grotesque shower of plastic limbs. He pushed her away, using the wrench as a barrier. She was relentless, a force of pure, unadulterated fury. Just as she closed in again, her eyes fixed on his jugular, a sudden jarring sound echoed through the workshop. The distinctive crackle of a police radio. "This is Officer Miller. We have an active situation at 142 Elm Street. Shots fired? No, wait," screams heard. "Requesting immediate backup." Sounds like a struggle. Jessica froze. Her head snapped towards the source of the sound, the open front door to the workshop, which David must have left ajar in his earlier haste. The police were here. How? Then he remembered. The burner phone. He'd left it on the counter in the main shop, still connected to the police dispatcher after his last frantic call, hoping someone would trace it. Seems they had. A flicker of panic, raw and human, crossed Jessica's face, momentarily eclipsing the madness. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a desperate, animalistic resolve. She glanced at the fallen knife, then back at David, her eyes burning with a savage intent. She wouldn't be taken. Not like this. Before David could react, she spun on her heel, darting past him towards a heavy metal door at the back of the workshop. An emergency exit, perhaps, or a storage room. "Jessica, no!" David yelled, scrambling after her, the wrench still clutched in his hand. She fumbled with a series of locks, her injured arm making it difficult. Footsteps pounded outside, growing louder. Sirens wailed, closer now. Just as she got the last lock undone, the main door to the workshop burst open. Officer Miller, pistol drawn, stood silhouetted in the doorway, followed by another officer. Their eyes swept across the chaotic scene. The toppled mannequins, the scattered limbs, David with the wrench, and Jessica struggling with the door. "Police! Drop the weapon!" Miller's voice boomed, directed at both of them. Jessica ignored him. With a final desperate shove, she threw open the back door and plunged into the darkness beyond. "She's escaping!" David shouted, pointing. Miller and the other officer didn't hesitate. They moved with practiced efficiency, one covering David, the other giving chase. "Stay here, sir. Are you injured?" Miller asked, his weapon still aimed, eyes scanning David for any threat. David dropped the wrench, his hands raised in surrender. "No, I'm fine. She's the one, she's the killer. Jessica Holloway." The pursuit was swift. The officers disappeared into the gloom of the alleyway behind the shop. David's legs felt like jelly, his body trembling from the adrenaline dump. He sank to the floor amidst the fallen mannequin parts, the cold concrete a stark contrast to the burning terror he just experienced. Minutes later, which felt like an eternity, the officers returned, Jessica in custody. Her injured arm was bleeding, and she was struggling, but her fight was futile against their trained restraint. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes still blazing with a defiant, unrepentant fury. As they led her past David, she met his gaze, a silent, chilling promise of retribution in her expression. The workshop, once a place of quiet, creative craftsmanship, was now a crime scene. Forensic teams would descend upon it, meticulously documenting the horror contained within. The mannequins, her family, would be cataloged as evidence, silent witnesses to a nightmare. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of Jessica Holloway, the mannequin killer, captivated the nation. The meticulous planning, the chilling motive, the grotesque use of her father's business as a stage for her delusions. It was a tale ripped from the darkest corners of the human psyche. The public struggled to comprehend how such an unassuming woman could harbor such a monstrous secret. David, hailed as a hero for his persistence and courage, found little comfort in the accolades. The images of Jessica's vacant stare, the glint of the knife, the chilling whisper of her motives, were seared into his memory. He had pursued a mystery, driven by an insatiable curiosity, and had stumbled into a labyrinth of madness. He had faced the truth, and it had nearly consumed him. He never looked at a mannequin the same way again. The innocent, expressionless faces now held a sinister undertone, a silent reminder of the perfect plastic family Jessica had so desperately tried to create. He understood now that some truths, once uncovered, leave indelible scars. The mannequin at the scene of the crime was not just a prop in a killer's twisted game. It was a symbol of a shattered reality, a chilling testament to the darkness that can lurk beneath the most ordinary exteriors. And David, the man who had dared to look, would carry that truth with him, always. The silence of the mannequins, once unsettling, was now a profound, terrifying echo in his mind, a perpetual reminder of the day he almost became one of them.